Welcome to Devotions from Israel, a 5-minute word of encouragement. Today's devotion comes from Psalm 18. One of my favorite regions to explore in Israel is the Judean Desert. Now, this desert is quite vast, and it is mentioned in the Bible a number of times. In fact, David, especially when he was being pursued by Saul, as well as Absalom, his son, later on, he wrote several of the Psalms from the context of the Judean Desert. Now, when we travel to a place called Masada, which incidentally was established as a palace fortress on the very southeast side of the Judean Desert, right on the border of the shoreline of the Dead Sea. Herod the Great built this palace fortress, a standalone mountain, if you will, as a place for retreat, as in retreating and protecting himself from those who didn't like him. Later on, Masada would be used in 70 A.D. after the destruction of the temple as a place also of refuge. It was a place where 967 Jews retreated to find protection in this fortress built previously by King Herod, but to find protection against the Romans. So is Masada mentioned in the Bible? I always answer that question with yes and no. Certainly no, not directly, and yet the word Masada comes from a Hebrew word, Metzada. You hear the similarities. Masada, Metzada. Well, maybe the appropriate question should be, is Metzada mentioned in the Bible? And indeed it is many, many times. In fact, Psalm 18 is one place where it is used by David in the context of being pursued by Saul. Listen to these verses of Psalm 18. I love you, Lord, my strength. The Lord is my rock, my fortress, my deliverer. My God is my rock, in whom I take refuge. My shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. I called to the Lord, who is worthy of praise, and I have been saved from my enemies. The cords of death entangled me. The torrents of destruction overwhelmed me. The cords of the grave coiled around me. The snares of death confronted me. Yet in my distress I called to the Lord. I cried to the Lord for help. From his temple he heard my voice. My cry came before him into his ears. The earth trembled and quaked, and the foundations of the mountains shook. They trembled because he was angry. As this psalm continues, David wrote, He reached down from on high and took a hold of me, and he drew me out of the deep waters. He rescued me from my powerful enemy, from my foes who were too strong for me. They confronted me in the day of my disaster, but the Lord was my support. He brought me out into a spacious place. He rescued me because he delighted in me. Is God your Metzada today? Are you entrusting your circumstances to his care. God is our fortress. He is our Metzada. And David realized this full well. There's at least 6 chapters in the book of 1 Samuel from about chapter 18 through 24, and even beyond, where David is pursued by King Saul, who was very jealous about David and his accomplishments, especially defeating the Philistine giant Goliath. So David hid in at least 15 or 16 locations, and I believe one of those locations was at this place, this standalone mountain that would be eventually called Metzada. Why? Because David found God here. He realized that God was his fortress, and what better place to protect himself than to be in God's presence and on this standalone mountain away from King Saul. Now in chapter 24 of 1 Samuel, David would actually confront Saul in a place about a 20-minute drive north of Masada called En-Gedi. But then David retreated as that chapter ends to the stronghold. Could this be, again, this standalone mountain that King Herod would eventually build as a palace fortress? So for David, God indeed was a Metzada, a fortress, a stronghold. And David trusted in God fully. Today is a day of opportunity for you to claim God as your personal Metzada. Claim him as your fortress today. Be encouraged. Until next time. Shalom.